Last year, I was living 2024, the plot. Specifically with these books. I read 116 books last year, which I know is absolutely unhinged. That's not normal behavior. That is not a sign of mental wellness. But since I read that many books, I wanted to tell you about them and also which ones I think you should read, which ones I think we could leave in 2024, and also give you a little bit of an insight into each one. And so this is every book I read in 2024 reviewed in one sentence each. Give or take. Mostly give, because I'm a professional yapper. This is Yap City, bitch. So I'm going to go through them in chronological order, and I'm going to get started because otherwise we will be here all day. Firstly, A Shining. I came to this book because John Foss had just won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and I am nothing if not curious, but I stayed for the vibes. And that is because this book reminded me of the Day After Tomorrow cover by Phoebe Bridgers, which is deeply personal to me. At first, I was like, what the fuck? Derogatory, but then by the end I was like, what the fuck? Complimentary. So there's that. The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida. This is a Sri Lankan book about a murdered war photographer, and in Sri Lanka it's believed that the soul only leaves the body truly after 7 moons have passed. In this book, this process materializes in the form of a waiting room administration office where everyone is sort of just waiting to be fully dead. In the meantime, we get to follow this incredibly witty and absurd man as he discusses the brutalities of war and violence and also tries to track down who murdered him. Mundo Cruel. These are concise short stories centering queer characters in Puerto Rico. They all end very neatly. They're kind of like tied with a little bow, which I find very satisfying. Personally, wish there had been more crossover between the stories to really get a sense of true community. I needed that Wizards on Deck with Hannah Montana crossover episode energy, and I didn't get it. These all felt like separate sports. I got Olympics, but I wanted Disney Channel games. 1,000 Mornings. Each time I read one line in this poetry collection, I chose a limb that I wanted to get it tattooed on. That's how beautiful these are. Whenever I read Mary Oliver, I want to throw my cellular device in the water like Lord and just live off the fat of the land like Lenny from Of Mice and Men. I feel like I want to go and milk a goat or something, you know? She's just all about loving and respecting and learning from the natural world, and I feel like I'm a better person when I read her poetry. 300,000 Kisses. This is a great way to read more mythology and to view it from a kind of queer theory lens. I just wish it had been curated in a more interesting way. Boulder. This hit me like a boulder, and I'm still kind of crushed under it. I also think this is proof that literary fiction can be erotic. It can be so sexy and smutty because my palms are sweaty just thinking about it. Anxious People. It is so rare that a book is laugh out loud funny, but this one will have you snorting like Charlie XCX when she was making Brat. It's about a botched hostage situation, but the hostage situation takes place at an apartment viewing. And so you have this really kind of odd mix of different people, this real hodgepodge of different people in society. So it's sort of a microcosm in that way. And each one of them shares their story and bonds with one another in a very endearing way. White Nights. You think you know love, and then you read White Nights. You think you know loneliness, you think you know yearning, you think you know unrequited emotions. Mostly, this is a book about how we can project expectations onto a person. You know, how you can kind of fall in love with the idea of a person rather than the person themselves. And it's told through a series of gorgeous, gorgeous conversations in which two deeply lonely people find momentary bliss with one another. And this altered my brain chemistry unfathomably. Heritage Aesthetics. This is a stunning poetry collection about the diaspora and Cyprus. Every poem is always kind of grappling with two things at once, and there's this rage almost simmering just beneath the surface that could bubble up at any time. But the poise and control that the poet has over that is so impressive. Kick the Latch. Oh, the Horse Girls are gonna love this. And I did too. It's kind of a hybrid between a novel and a memoir because it's based on interviews with a real life horse trainer. And it's about her life and the horses. Like, Peter, yeah, the horse is here. And if this is a question of yay or nay, I choose yay every time. Do you get it? It's a horse pun. Anyway, moving on. Idlewild is a campus story about girlhood and a theatre community and young unrequited love, but also a trans coming of age story, and it's set in New York during 9/11.
Well, you don't want to hear about 9/11.
As you can tell, this one is hard to describe in a single sentence, and I think that is the crux of the issue here. It's kind of like when you have lots of different vibrant paint colors, right? And you're painting with all of them and you're mixing them all together, but it kind of just turns into this muddy, brown color. That's kind of what happened here. There was so much going on that it kind of all just merged together into this murky nothingness. Next, I read A Very Easy Death by Simone de Beauvoir. I love de Beauvoir's writing. The one thing I just beat myself up about is that I can't read it in the original French. I wish I could read books in French, and I started studying French in 2022, and I really let it slip in 2024, and I'm so mad at myself, and I have to change this in 2025. I want to get back on track. And the way that I'm doing that is by using Lingoda, who have very kindly sponsored today's video. I've been using Lingoda since 2022 when I first started. The best thing about Lingoda is that, well, firstly, it's an e-learning platform, meaning that you can learn languages online. So you can pick to do the group classes or private classes at any time that suits you, that works well with your schedule and your routine. But because you are encouraged to actually speak the language with your teacher, with your classmates, you have to listen to what your classmates are saying and understand them, as well as the teacher, who is a native level teacher. You are encouraged to actually speak the language. And so I got so confident. Like when I was living in France, this is how I learned French, and I could get around with so much confidence. And I have to get back to that point. That's my New Year's resolution, is to get back on it with my French. And maybe you want to learn a language too. Using Lingoda, you can learn French, Spanish, Italian, German, English, or business English. It means that when you move to a new place or you go on holiday, you can fit in like a local, but also you can study in your own time. So you can go back and look at the class notes. And with Lingoda Flex, you can learn anytime from anywhere in the world. You can actually head to Lingoda right now to get a free 7-day trial to check it out, test the waters, see if you like it. I'm sure you will. And then you can use my code JACK2025 to get 45 free private classes and a 10% discount. And that is in your first 3 months of Lingoda Flex. The link to join Lingoda is in the description down below. I am hoping that this time next year, when I make this video of all of the books that I read in 2025, one of them will have been in French, and Lingoda is going to help me make that happen. So thank you so much to Lingoda for working with me on this video. Bad diaspora poems. That is not true. This is a good poetry collection contemplating identity, the art of poetry, class, immigration, and also translation. At one point she says, we as humans weren't made to endure. We are made to live, and I love this so much. Roaming, right, I have to talk about this. This graphic novel made me viscerally angry. I was like shaking with rage. It's a beautifully illustrated story about a group of friends who go on a trip, but this one girl, Fiona, is just such a bummer. Let me just tell you right now, if Fiona has 0 haters, I am dead. Fiona is that one friend who just ruins the trip. Fiona is that one friend who is bad vibes. She keeps dragging the others down, insulting them. She's cynical. She's dismissive. She says doing all the touristy things in New York is cringe. And she just ruins the trip for everyone. She is so obnoxious. And the worst part is we all know a Fiona in real life. Fuck you, Fiona. The Rachel incident. This is a charming story about the chaotic reality of being in your 20s. It's about 2 friends who share a house together and they're finding their feet in the world. This Irish humor is more dry than the Sahara, and I lapped it up. These 2 friends come of age, come out, come apart. Rachel has a big fat crush on one of her professors, but he is more interested in her housemate. Bright Fear. This is split into 3 sections. Firstly, it kind of contemplates language and translation. Then it contemplates the transformative nature of poetry. And then the 3rd section contemplates one's own position within their family and their parents' expectations of them. And then peppered throughout, this is my pepper grinder, by the way. I don't know why I did that. The poet also considers the concept of queerness and microaggressions against Asian people, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic Lovato. True Biz is a book about a sign language learning school. And as someone who studied sign language, I loved the concept. I just hated the execution, unfortunately. In my opinion, it should have been written in the first person so that we could easily distinguish between the character voices, but there are 3 POVs and they all sound the same, even though their ages are drastically different. I also think that the POVs should have been whittled down from 3 to 2, and the structure could have been fixed. This structure was a Sophia Richie dance because it was messy. Greta and Valdin features alternating perspectives from the 2 titular characters. Yes, I said tit. Let's move on. They are both navigating their 20s and they are siblings, but what I liked is that they both had their own little side quests going on that didn't include each other. So they would go away, do their own thing, and then they would come back together and discuss or collide. And I thought it was authentic and believable and witty. Not a River is a fitting title for this one because it just didn't really flow for me. I liked it, don't get me wrong, and it's an interesting exploration of grief and ghosts of our past and male friendship and fishing, sure. But for me, it just felt a little too feathery. I just didn't really engage with this one. Roundabout is called a lipograph, and that basically means it's a book that doesn't include one letter at all. And this book doesn't ever include the letter E, which is not easy to do. I'm here all day. And this one actually isn't just a big gimmick. It's actually very good. And I posted a whole reading vlog of this one on my channel if you want to go and check it out. And unfortunately, we did find that there is one E in the book, which I feel really bad about accidentally exposing. But listen, you can't spell expose without two E's. Dog songs. When I say I got the dog in me, this is what I'm referring to. I love this because I too want to write a whole poem every time my dog does anything sweet or acknowledges my existence. The Ink Cloud Reader is poetry about Hong Kong. It's about coexisting with long-term partners. It's about reverence of the natural world. Sometimes I found it a little cliche, sometimes a little overly abstract. There were lines that I loved, but not many full poems that I found to be perfect. And the collection is bound together by the motif of ink, but I'm not convinced that that was actually an interesting enough concept to kind of bind this whole thing together. I'm not sure it was interesting enough, you know? I have some questions for you. True crime fans need to form an orderly queue outside the bookstore and get this one. A Psalm for the Wild Built. I have never and will never know what it feels like to take a bra off at the end of the day, but I imagine it feels like reading this book. It was a satisfying read. I will not be elaborating on this further. What I'd rather not think about. The things I'd rather not think about are QR code menus at restaurants, the big light in a room that should not be on at any point, and the TikTok shop. Those are my three. In this book, what I'd rather not talk about is grief and death. I don't know why I introduced it like that. Specifically, this is about the death of someone's twin sibling. Can you even imagine what that experience is like? Well, you don't have to because this book is about it. You can find out. And I would argue that is definitely worse than QR codes at restaurants and almost as bad as the TikTok shop. If Not Winter, Fragments of Sappho. This is hard to review because it really is fragments of Sappho. So Sappho was a Greek poet, but most of her work has been lost. This is kind of like mere morsels of Sappho. Like sometimes the page is just a couple words or a couple of lines, half of the line, but we accept the scraps anyway and say thank you, Sappho, because they are beautiful. They are stunning. The Forward Book of Poetry 2024 was a great way to discover some new poets. A Dictator Calls is an exploration of the concept of truth and perspective and how there are many truths based on many perspectives. It tells the same story, I want to say like 17 times from 17 different perspectives, which I enjoyed the first 4 times, maybe the first 5, but by number 8 or 9, I was bored. Page Boy is a title that I think is so unbelievably clever, it could get 5 stars for the title alone, because it's about Elliot Page transitioning to being a boy. I learned a lot from this book about Elliot Page's career and also about the experience of gender dysphoria, but I would say it's a bit of a mix of stories with not a lot of analysis and introspection aside from things that his therapist has told him, and that therapy speak can be a little bit nauseating after a while, and I would have liked to hear him coming to his own conclusions about things a little bit more. Black Butterflies is about the war in Bosnia, and it has this scene where snow so delicately falls on a war-torn and destroyed Sarajevo. And it's a scene that is just like seared into my brain. I will never ever forget reading that because it brings about this momentary peace and quiet and bliss where there's like kind of this blanket of snow, but there is this inevitability that the snow will melt and that things will go back to, in fact, they get worse. And this book just like crushed me in a good way. The House of Hidden Meanings is a series of motivational Instagram captions disguised and packaged as a book. Green Dot. Listen, writing a quirky character with modern pop culture references who isn't incredibly annoying is the ultimate challenge for millennial writers. It's like they're all trying to do it and very few succeed. Madeline Gray succeeded. She does not just do it successfully, but she does it superbly. This is a win in the Millennial Olympics. This gets gold. The Details is such a special book. It does what it says on the tin. The best part about this book is the way that it captures the idiosyncrasies and the little details that tile together to create the mosaic of of a person. It really slows down to consider microscopic moments and ultimately asks the question, does a painting tell you more about the subject of the portrait or about the person doing the painting themselves? The Silver Bone, I don't remember anything about this book except that it was a spy book and that I didn't enjoy it. Kairos. Oh, a moment for Kairos. This is a love story set before, during, and after the fall of East Germany and the Berlin Wall, which deservingly won the International Booker Prize. I want to get a lobotomy just to wipe this from my brain so that I can experience it for the very first time again. After you were, I am. My mom told me that if I have nothing good to say, then just to say nothing at all, and so that's what I'm choosing to do here. Actually, scrap that, because the next book is Come and Get It. What the hell was this, bestie? I loved Kylie Reid's first book, so I actually am going to be wearing all black for all of 2025 in mourning for the potential of this book. I'm so devastated. I am grieving what we could have had, but Come and Get It. You can keep it. I don't want it. It's very rare that I finish a book and I don't know why it was written, but I read every page of this. I read every word in this book, and I still don't know what the point was. Undiscovered is an autofiction story about a woman who realizes that she can trace her ancestry back to both the colonized and the colonizers. And so she has to kind of grapple with that she has directly benefited from the colonialism of the people around her and the kind of emotional diarrhea that causes a person. Happy all the time. I want to read this all the time. This made me happy all the time after I read it. This is about two couples and how their lives intersect, and it is so brilliant in the way that it captures ordinariness, but it is anything but ordinary. The Flame by Leonard Cohen. Stab me in the chest and you will not see blood pouring out. You will see the lines of poetry that I read in this book. The Garden of Time is a short story by J.G. Ballard that inspired this year's Met Gala theme, and I'm glad we met. I'm glad to be acquainted. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. And it's proof that there is a real power to being concise. Sometimes you can tell such a moving story with only 7 or 8 pages. Cat's Cradle. All I have to say about this is that I think that Kurt Vonnegut would have been the coolest guest at any dinner party he ever attended. And that's the tea. Doppelganger is a fascinating discussion about the incongruity between the way that we perceive ourselves and the way we are perceived by others, and which version of those two things is actually the truth. This includes a brilliant analysis of Israel and Palestine from the perspective of a pro-Palestine Jewish woman. So it's so educational, and this was my favorite nonfiction book of the year and the winner of the inaugural Women's Prize for Nonfiction. So if you won't take my word for it, take theirs. Funny story. Listen, we bow at the altar of Emily Henry, the patron saint of romances. Friendaholic. This is an analysis of friendship, the concept of friendship. My favorite parts were when she would talk about the philosophy of friendship and invoke people like Aristotle and other great minds. It talks about how friendships can often be the great loves of your life, but obviously it is limited by the fact that it is based on one person's experiences of friendship. So take that with a pinch of salt. Their Monstrous Hearts is a kaleidoscopic new horror novel which comes out in 2025, which I actually blurbed. It has a really exquisite eye for detail and is as delicate and fragile as the wings of a butterfly. You Are Here proves that a novel all about two people just going for a walk and talking can actually be really charming and entertaining, especially in the hands of David Nichols, one of our generation's most talented romance writers. Table for Two. This is Amor Towles' collection of short stories, and then also there's a novella where he brings back characters from one of his previous books. You know when, as a reader, you can't get a character out of your head and you keep thinking about them? Imagine being the writer and having the power to bring them back to life in this way. He uses historical settings in a really smart way, and the sense of humor is so razor sharp, you could cut your finger on it. Old Babes in the Wood. Margaret. What was this, Margaret? I'm gonna pretend that I didn't read this one because I really like Margaret Atwood. In fact, I'm gonna pretend I haven't read anything that she's written since 2017. Evenings and Weekends. I loved this book so much that I ended up speaking about it on TV when I was on this show called Between the Covers on the BBC, which I actually can't believe I got to do this year. That was so cool. Evenings and Weekends feels like a soap opera in a book. And it's also a love story to London. What I appreciated most about this is that there are no villains. Characters make mistakes, they do terrible things to each other, but ultimately this book is an exercise in empathy. It challenges us to understand why people behave in the way that they do. And I think that is so important in a time where the internet has made a lot of people very mean. And we need nuance in the ways that we think about why people behave in the way that they do, and this book provides it. Private rights. If I had a nickel for every time Julia Armfield has written a book about being extremely wet, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. This one features a lot of rain. A lot of rain. Weirdo. I am not a violent person. I'm an extreme pacifist. But this book nearly drove me to put my fist through the nearest wall. It made me so infuriated. I would have thrown the book out the window, but I wouldn't want to risk someone else finding it and reading it. This was not for me. Blue Sisters. Coco Mellors is, for me, an instant by author. I love the way that she strings a sentence together like little jewels on a chain. We follow 3 sisters who are grieving the loss of their 4th sibling, and each one is battling with their kind of inner demons and also addiction in their own way. It's set across London and Paris and New York and LA, and I just love the meticulous care that Coco Mellors puts into every line of her writing. I flew through this. If you're in a reading slump, I think this could get you out. Or if you're reading too many books and you need a book to put you into a reading slump, Rebel Rising. If you're wondering what Rebel Wilson could possibly say in a memoir, so is she. The answer is nothing. Literally nothing interesting at all. Knife. Meditations after an attempted murder. I don't know what is better, this book or the cover design. I just think it is so badass to be nearly assassinated and then to write something this good about the experience. Woke Up, No Light. Layla Motley. I am falling at your feet. I will kiss the ground that you walk on. Her debut collection, Nightcrawling, was so harrowing, but also so poetic that I could not wait to read some of her actual poetry, and so I did. And it turns out that reading this is not enough. I need an IV drip, just like pumping this directly into my bloodstream. Please and thank you. The English Understand Wall. This book kind of reads like a Wes Anderson film, if it was a book. It's an interesting discussion about how trauma sells, and a fun allegory about the way that people, especially in the publishing industry, take advantage of other people's trauma and other people's tragedies, and sometimes are willing to sacrifice the truth in favor of sales. 100 Lovers. This is a poetry collection with some good lines, but you really do have to sift through it to find them. The Ministry of Time. I loved this at first. And it was such a riot. It was having a giggle with the concept of time travel and having to describe to a man from like 1848 what a bicycle was, or explaining Spotify and Tinder. But unfortunately, in the second half, it turned into the Ministry of Time I will not get back. The premise just got way too elaborate for me at the end that I was like, what the hell is actually going on? And then also, I feel like they overplayed the romance element of this book, because they decided it was more marketable to do that, and ultimately the concept was cheapened by it. The concept was strong enough to not need that. Piglet. This book doesn't need anything for dinner tonight because it already ate. It's about a woman finding out something terrible about the guy she's about to marry, and then she just absolutely spirals, and that spiraling takes the form of gorging on food. A Tale for the Time Being is very relatable because if I found someone else's diary, I would read the entire thing in one sitting and be captivated by it. And Still I Rise. I can't tell if I thought this was a little basic, ? Or whether so many poets have been inspired by Maya Angelou that's why it felt like I wasn't reading something new that I hadn't already read before. Gillian. If you look up the definition of the word insufferable in the Oxford English Dictionary, I think you will just find either the ISBN number for this book or the complete manuscript. Grief is for People had me mourning the life of someone I didn't even know. Martyr is not only a favorite book of the year, it's a new favorite book of all time for me. I thought this was so amazing. It's about a recovering alcoholic who hears that a woman who is dying of cancer is living in a museum in New York, and she's speaking to anyone who comes in and sits in the chair opposite her. And he pays her a visit, which helps to guide his discussion of martyrdom and his analysis of death and grief. And this is a perfect novel. Absolutely perfect. No notes, 10 out of 10. It woke up like this, flawless. And every morning, the way home gets longer and longer. A moment of appreciation for that title. Oh my God. The 7-Year Slip. Now, a woman comes home to her apartment and there is a man in there who isn't supposed to be.
Why would a man be there? Why would a man be there?
She realizes that he lived there 7 years ago, and she has entered this weird kind of time slip where she can speak with him from 7 years ago, but then she goes out to find him 7 years later in the present day, and she realizes how much he has changed from the person that she fell in love with. And so she has to reconcile the passing of time and also the awareness that he may not remember her. I liked it. I didn't say it was good. I said that I liked it. Ellipses, ... poems. I really recommend this if you're looking to read more Palestinian literature, as we all should be. This is a really important collection. All Fours, one of the most memorable characters I have ever read. I cannot stop thinking about her. She consumes my waking thoughts. After finishing reading this, I genuinely considered etching Miranda July, the author's name, into my floorboards, like my own personal Hollywood Walk of Fame, just in my bedroom. Headshot. Genius concept. It's so good. So basically it's about girl fighters who are at a boxing match. There's 8 of them, and the novel is told in a series of face-offs between the girls. During the tournament, the girls have to identify one another's physical and mental vulnerabilities in order to beat them in a fight and establish what their weaknesses are. And that creates such a brilliant arena, literally, for discussing girlhood in its myriad forms. Madonna in a fur coat. You think you know yearning, and then you read Madonna in a fur coat. You think you know the fleeting nature of happiness, and then you read Madonna in a fur coat. You think you know unrequited love, you think you know lyrical writing, and then you read Madonna in a fur coat. If Beale Street could talk, James Baldwin, I would read your toilet paper. Everything you write is so perfect. Checkmate, this book is just toilet paper. I'm kidding. It was okay. It's like aggressively okay. It's the Queen's Gambit if it was written by a 15-year-old. Orbital was the worthy winner of this year's Booker Prize, and deservedly so. It's set on a spacecraft in which its inhabitants are looking at the Earth, and they start to get really protective of the Earth. They start to feel a lot of fondness for the place that they call home, and ultimately they realize, because they're all from different countries and backgrounds, that borders are just a thing that humans created. Passports are a human man-made invention. We set up these boundaries that told each other, you are different from me. And when they're in this space, in this confinement, they realize actually they're way more similar than they've been led to believe. And the Earth is something that we have to protect. It starts with us. I miss the person I was before I read this book. I read the entire legal document of the Blake Lively smear campaign, and every page was more interesting than this entire novel combined. I don't know what the point of this was. This was a cash grab. This served no purpose. It didn't add to the story at all. Save your money. Save your time. The creative act. I think a lot about when Jacob Collier said that this is a book about being creative for people who aren't. And that is such a violation, but it's so true. There are some good moments. There are some absolute zingers. Again, this is kind of like Instagram captions in a book, but if you are already creative, you will know all of this already. Okay, I read LA Woman by Eve Babbitt and then Heartburn by Nora Ephron. And I think there's a certain audacity that these two writers both had, Eve Babbitt and Nora Ephron, that is so commanding. They are like the it girls of fiction. I felt cooler just reading their work. They feel like the cool girl at a party who every time they started to speak, everyone just shuts up and listens, you know? Enlightenment. This is written like a Victorian novel, and I mean that in the most derogatory way. Last Summer in the City is another new all-time favorite for me. I was kicking my feet because of how good this writing was. I started to underline my favorite lines, but then the whole book was just underlined. So I'm going to need a new copy because it's actually, you can't read it anymore. I want to buy this for everyone I know. It's so good. So good. Brat. Now, releasing a book called Brat the same year that Charlie XCX released the album Brat is brave. It also means that the book needed to be memorable. And this is a book about someone who is ripping off layers of their own skin. So it did succeed on that front, for sure. When Haru was here, I actually went on tour with Dustin Tao to talk about this book across America. I interviewed him on 4 or 5 different occasions. So I actually now know more about this book than I know about my entire family. But one of my favorite facts about this is that there are some Vietnamese sections where the mum speaks in Vietnamese, and these lines were actually written by Dustin's own mum, and I think that is so special. Butter. As I said, I went on a TV show called Between the Covers, which is kind of like a book club on telly, and we all had to read one book that was the same, and so we all read Butter. And while I thought it was a fascinating dissection of women in Japanese society, how they perceive others, how they perceive themselves. I did think that it was about 150 pages too long and so repetitive to the point of monotony. So this to me just needed a lot more editing, I think. Caledonian Road. This book I love, but it is like that friend that's just too woke. Like, I am woke, don't get me wrong, I'm a lefty liberal snowflake, but this book made me feel like Piers Morgan. What a way to go. Lord, take all of Richard Osman's success and give it to Bella Mackie, please. This is a funny murder whodunit, very readable, very bingeable, but also a class commentary and a satire about the upper echelon of society in which everyone kind of just hates each other. Aguaviva, I worship the ground that Clarice Lispector walks on. The Passion, according to GH, again, I worship the ground that Clarice Lispector walks on. I Will Greet the Sun Again is not as good as the title makes it sound like it's going to be, but I did like it. Does that make sense? Dear Dickhead, even better than the title makes it sound like it's going to be. The Safekeep, further proof that literary books can be sexy. I loved the tension. I loved how much the characters just hated each other. They despised each other. They got under each other's skin. But it also develops into a really fascinating commentary about ownership and property and who has the right to own space and echoes of the Second World War. Permafrost. I wish I could roll up every piece of Eva Baltazar's writing and just smoke them directly into my lungs. McGlue, I want whatever Otesha Moshfegh is smoking, and I know that it's strong. The Husbands, I don't want whatever Holly Gramazio is smoking. This to me was just like aggressively average. It's about a woman whose husband changes every time he goes up into the attic, but for me it was all fart and no poo. Like, the concept is good, but it didn't really go anywhere interesting for me. It kind of felt like it just had nowhere to go, except the attic, I guess. The Pumpkin Spice Cafe is cozy autumnal vibes set in a small town, but that's ultimately all this book is. It's just vibes. I wanted to shake the author and be like, just slow down. These people just met. Not everything has to be resolved within a few paragraphs. Let's just linger. To borrow a term from the title, this book is like a pumpkin. It's kind of like a carved out pumpkin, which is pretty on the outside, but ultimately hollow on the inside. Stoneyard Devotional. I love weird books. I love weird books. I love weird books so much. This is about a woman who escapes her small town and moves into a female commune, but plot twist, there's like a plague happening at this commune. So it's infested with mice and strange things keep occurring. It's a pretty wild ride, but told in very straightforward prose. You Again is a retelling of When Harry Met Sally, which, although obviously it can't replicate the singularity of Nora Ephron's tone and humor, it is a fun romp with characters that I was genuinely rooting for. I find a lot of romance books kind of unrealistic, but this one I believed in. The Virgin Suicides is not Richard Branson's 13 Reasons Why, but instead a deeply moving book about the enigmatic Lisbon sisters. Oh my god, I'm so embarrassed. When I first bought this book and I did a haul on my channel, I was like, yeah, so I think it's about these sisters who live in Lisbon. Their surname is Lisbon. They are the Lisbon sisters, not sisters from Lisbon. I look like a dummy when I said that on the internet, but I hadn't read it yet in my defense. But now I have, and I loved it. This is an instant classic. It is about these girls, but it's told through the perspective of the boys who live across the street who worshipped and almost mythologized them. In Graveyard Shift, 5 people look at a hole. It's kind of like if Scooby-Doo didn't have a talking dog or any plot development. Something Wicked This Way Comes was touted as the ultimate kind of autumn Halloween read, and it absolutely did not disappoint. This was perfect for that time of year. I've actually never seen a more accurate recommendation than that. Creation Lake. This book includes rants about how pasta is the ultimate Italian scam because it's just like the same thing in different shapes, and also how graffiti is worse than murder in this character's perspective. Honestly, iconic. It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over is an ironic title because I never wanted this to end ever. Sorry, I have to interrupt this broadcast to tell you that I forgot some books. Firstly, Christmas Tree Farm. Justice for Christmas Tree Farm. This was cheesy, but at Christmas time, you know when you want like the whole charcuterie board of cheese? This was the perfect level of cheesiness for the season. Cold Nights of Childhood. If you like the dizzying lyrical prose of Osamu Dazai or Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, mixed with the intensity of Dostoevsky's White Nights and Madonna in a Fur Coat, two books I love, read this book. All books and authors that I love, you should read this book. One of Turkey's most beloved writers crafts this novel that is both feathery and vivid, light on the page, but heavy in meaning. And it's a complex and bewildered take on life and mental health, written from the perspective of a character who is undergoing electroshock therapy. So she is just frazzled, but it's truly, truly beautiful, albeit disorientating. Julia, listen, throw me in room 101 and you will find me surrounded by only copies of this book to read. I'm so gutted about this because it's a 1984 retelling, but really this only reminded me how untouchable George Orwell's original book actually truly is. This kind of just reads like one of those post-Hunger Games, teen dystopia craze era books from like 2014. The 2014ification of 1984 is diabolical. I'm so sad about this one. James, on the other hand, is a gorgeous literary retelling. It also feels incredibly necessary. This is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn, but from the perspective of Jim the slave. Jim reclaims his voice, and this story just adds so much texture, so much detail, so much nuance. And whereas in Julia, the characters are flattened to be almost one-dimensional caricatures of themselves, this book expands the characters and gives them more depth. This is a literary retelling done right. Mongrel. I remember picking this up because the cover said that it reads like an Oscar-winning movie, and that is absolutely the best description of this. This had me in the palm of its hand. You follow 3 different Japanese women as they come of age, come out, come together. They come together in more ways than one, let me tell you. Sorry. Autumn. I know that this book was clever, and I enjoyed the discussion about Brexit. That was really interesting, but unfortunately, the rest of the book, I just didn't care. It was just a little too abstract for me. Books that are experimental always interest me, but sometimes the experiment doesn't go well. And I think that's how I felt about this one. I feel like I should give it another go when I have time, but I also know that I definitely won't do that. So I'm only lying to myself. Held, on the other hand, was a good level of experimental. I don't think all of the experiments paid off, but I think it was worth the read. It's a meditation on grief and war and longing, and unfortunately it becomes a bit of a family saga, and you start to follow different generations of the same family. But I wish we'd just stuck with the first generation because they were the most interesting to me, and I would have liked to have seen their story develop more. The Wood at Midwinter is a sweet Christmas kind of fairy tale. Good at Christmas, nothing to really write home about, I would say. I then read A Book for Christmas. Can you tell? It was Christmas time. 'Tis the damn season. I was getting in the festive spirit. This book includes the line, "But what shall I do on Christmas night if no one has given me a book?" So true, bestie. Then we have another book called White Nights. If I had a nickel for every time I gave a book called White Nights 5 stars this year, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot. But it's weird that it happened twice, right? These are short stories. They all end with a Mike Tyson style punch to the gut, and I thought they were brilliant. And finally, I read Days at the Morisaki Bookshop and More Days at the Morisaki Bookshop, and these are just comforting reads. They talk about how it's okay to slow down and take things at your own pace, that you are a little boat in a harbor, and sometimes you have to be docked and just wait out the storm before you can go and sail again and do your next adventure. And I thought that was beautiful. And then also, there are some books that I started but didn't finish. So I wanted to tell you about those as well and the reason that I didn't finish them. Firstly, Housemates. I found this unreadable. So many of my favorite book talkers loved this book, but in my head, it was like reading alphabet soup. It was like a speech jammer. I couldn't get into this at all, unfortunately, but I do want to give it another go. Atonement. I thought this was going to be one of my new favorite books, but I found the first 2 chapters so boring, where it's just Bryony's play. But then I watched the movie, and it was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in my whole entire life. So I definitely need to give this another go. I think that once you get past that initial hump, it will be better. So I will be giving this another go in 2025. This one's like an "it's not you, it's me" kind of situation. The Heaven and Earth grocery store was so info dumpy right at the beginning that I dumped the book. A Nearby Country Called Love. I liked the title, and let's leave it at that. Winter by Ali Smith, I also just couldn't get into. And finally, The Archive of Feelings. I was reading this book on the train, And then I accidentally left it on the train, and I realized I cared so little about what was going on that I just never replaced my copy. I never bought another one. I haven't thought about it since. I don't remember anything that was going on in that book. And so I think that's a good reason to DNF it. Anyway, back to what I was saying before. So we did it, guys. Another year of reading. Those were all of the books that I read in 2024, reviewed in one sentence each. Let me know if any of these books tickle your pickle, if you're going to be picking up any of these in 2025. I just made a video that I uploaded last week, I think, where I spoke about all of the books that I want to read in 2025. That's kind of my little reading list in there, if you want to go and check that out as well. I'll also be making videos where I expand more on my best books of the year and worst books of the year, because I want to, you know, talk about them in all of their glory or mess. So those videos will be coming very, very soon. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all of the support in 2024. I love you to the moon and back, and I can't wait to see you in my next video. All the best, stay in touch, have the most wonderful day, and bye-bye.